Azoth by Zeitgeistic. Chapter 5. Fixation. Fixation, a process by which a previously volatile substance is transformed into a form that is not affected by fire. Separation of a substance before being recombined into another shape at a subatomic level. Friday may have only been 5 days away, but those 5 days took 5 years to actually pass. Harry, you aren't obsessing over my ridiculous, are you? He stopped short, one hand already pressing against the back of the portrait. What do you mean? Hermione pursed her lips and craned her neck up to confirm that no one else was lingering near the balustrade at the top of the stairs. You've had that obsessed look about you again, like 6th year all over. And you've been looking at Malfoy all week. And now you're leaving to meet with him. Don't pretend like you're surprised I figured that out. I was just teasing you. You don't need to sneak around to see him. I don't mind that you want to be friends. I know you're not into him. That's what you think. He said he'd help. Hermione's look was decidedly sardonic. In exchange for what? Did anyone think he had anything to offer? He is stuck trying to get his animagus. It was guaranteed to get Hermione's mind rolling in another direction, and it worked like a charm. Oh, we really should finish ours. We were so close. Are you sure you want to finish? He asked, smirking a bit. My film isn't that bad, but she was frowning. It's very practical. Harry smirked. Brings back memories, I'm sure. Then, do you think it would bring back memories for Bulstrode? She'd probably try to exorcise you if she ever found you in her room. Millicent's first pet, Dark Lady, hadn't died until the first week back for 8th year. Upon first seeing it in her room that first night, Hermione had sent Harry a frantic message that required 6 rotations of the protean charm on his galleon. It's her cat. Thought it looked familiar and visualized. Exactly same marking as Bulstrode's fucking cat. Must have been PJP. Somehow changed my DNA when taken. Now thinks actual cat is my animagus. Bollocks! Millicent, for her part, was not one to linger, and had replaced Dark Lady with her physical and metaphysical opposite by the weekend. Peep was wide, frequently terrified, and annoying as fuck. Just go, Harry, he said, throwing a quill at him in exacerbation. But do try not to obsess over Malfoy this year. He's almost certainly not up to anything except getting his newts, and even if he is, that is Ron's problem now. By some miracle, he managed to get to the spare patient's classroom before Malfoy, and even had his practice cauldron set up on the fire, carefully heating to a rumbling simmer. Whatever the fuck that means, Harry once would have thought. But now his potions-making knowledge was coming right along, and he knew the difference between a low simmer, a rumbling simmer, and a boil. Malfoy came in, looking harassed. There was disarray, and his mouth was set in a brooding line. Lines above his nose softened as he noticed Harry at the front desk and the soothing, minty smell steaming up from his cauldron. Cold cure? He asked. Yes, it's tricky. Malfoy frowned. Tricky is not the word I'd use. He set his things down next to Harry's cauldron, and they regarded each other for a moment. It was only then that Harry remembered that they were not exactly friends, no matter what his mind might suggest to him at times. He couldn't get his mind off Malfoy. Did it mean he was obsessing, or did it mean that the world was trying to bring to his attention something wonderful and profound? Something that could maybe be, if only they could just distill like one of Harry's new potions. Tip for tip, Malfoy said. That's how we do this. Me first. Harry nodded, pulled down a smile. Of course Malfoy would want to go first. Malfoy looked as though he expected more argument from Harry and was discomfited when he didn't receive it, though he recovered soon enough. Good. I do fine with the meditation, but when I try to visualize, I don't get anything. I know I'm doing it right. Nothing? Harry asked. Not even a hint? Malfoy crossed his arms. No. Harry leaned back against the table behind him, thinking over the desperately lonely Christmas he and Hermione had endured last year. Save for their terrifying run-in with Nagini, they had been thoroughly alone and trackless. What had it been like when he first saw his form for the first time? Maybe seeing wasn't the right term for it. It was more that he understood it. Understood it with the same bitter acceptance that he'd understood the meaning of the messages on Dumbledore's snitch the night he walked into the forest. But he was past that now, and he could see the value in things he'd have once spurned, like his animagus form.
What do you feel when you reach the end of the meditation stage?
Malfoy shifted.
Restless.
Harry stirred.
Restless, skittish. Death.
He remembered those feelings as if it had been just yesterday and not well over a year ago.
Anything else?
Malfoy shrugged.
Need to run.
He looked away.
Meditation isn't supposed to make you feel like you're caged. I felt restless too,
Harry said, and was more sure than ever that he knew the reason Malfoy couldn't complete his visualization.
It was part of my animal's instincts. What's your animal?
Harry smirked.
Nope. I'll show you mine when you show me yours.
Malfoy frowned.
I can't even get to the visualization. You're overthinking it,
said Harry, who was grateful Malfoy apparently hadn't caught Harry's Freudian slip.
It's probably part of your animal's temperament. Why don't you meditate again here, and when you reach the visualization stage, focus on the feelings of restlessness instead of pulling out of the meditation? The book's all said that when I reach the visualization stage, I'll be calm and prepared for change. Maybe you are, said Harry. Maybe your occlumency training helped you enough that your meditation works a little differently. And when you try to visualize, you're so primed for it that you go right into your animal's mind.
Malfoy still looked unconvinced.
Just try and see,
Harry said. Malfoy sat down on the chair next to Harry. His eyes fell shut. It was so close, and it was so incredibly stimulating. Harry had never noticed how delicate and pink the skin above Malfoy's eyes was. How tired he looked when they were closed, and the redness of his lids was visible. He breathed softly, and Harry found himself thinking that if things could change, he would change them so that he could be near Malfoy breathing like that all the time. He reached out, laid his hand over Malfoy's arm before he even realized what he was doing. Malfoy's eyes snapped open, mercurial and fierce, and so very close.
What?
Harry swallowed, felt his face flame like the finicky burner in Stockholm's class.
You owe me a tip first.
Malfoy eyed his cauldron. The water in his spare pewter cauldron was simmering now, but Harry hadn't done anything else to it.
Is that just distilled water? He asked.
Harry nodded.
Set up your lead cauldron with a vitriol base and watch the difference in how they heat. That's not a tip.
Yes, it is. Malfoy closed his eyes again and proceeded to completely ignore Harry while he sat about with his meditation. Annoyed, Harry unshrunk his lead cauldron and dug through his potions kit for the sample bottle of vitriol base that came with every standard kit. It was dusty and still had sealing wax around the cork, but appeared fresh enough when Harry opened it. He tipped it carefully into the cauldron and adjusted the flame beneath it. Malfoy's breathing was evening out. He sat very straight, but still managed to look lax and carefree in a way that would have made Harry just look slumpy if he tried to imitate it. The steam from Harry's water-filled cauldron was curling the tips of his hair again. That day in Stockholm's class felt like it had happened years ago, or maybe seconds ago. Harry checked on his cold cure potion and added in the final ingredient. Merlin, this potion was very annoying to brew. He'd started it 6 times already, and he usually ruined it within the first 20 minutes. This was only the 2nd time he'd made it to the 3rd step. His other 2 cauldrons should have been simmering now, but the lead one wasn't. Checked his 1 timer. 12 minutes. Still no rumbling simmer. Beneath the cauldron, the flame looked fine. Touched the side of the cauldron, and it felt warm, too. Suddenly, Malfoy twitched and was nearly out of his chair before his eyes even opened. Saw Harry and froze like a deer. Slowly lowered himself back down.
Wanted to run,
he said quietly. Peered into Harry's lead cauldron. The vitriol was green and oily and had a terrible smell.
This really goes in potions people drink?
Harry asked. Malfoy rolled his eyes. See how it gets hot but doesn't boil? How could that be useful? Oh. In potions that need to get really hot to brew without hurting the ingredients, like dragon nutrient potions and flame retardants for brooms. Malfoy seemed pleased. Now, siphon a bit and put it in your water cauldron. Just a bit. The water hissed and began to evaporate. Malfoy swished his wand, lightning fast, and transfigured a pewter of his cauldron into lead. Vitriol ruins most metals, Potter, he said tightly. Lead. Always. Lead. Feeling decidedly stupid, Harry nodded, and together they watched a bit of green acid dry up all the water and then gather at the bottom of his cauldron in a prim little pool of rank-smelling oil. And then Harry understood. You can guess what type of potion you're looking at by the container or cauldron it's in, and by the way it reacts or doesn't react with heat and water. Malfoy grinned. Right in one. The best lesson for a potions master is knowing what he's brewed or what he's looking at. Never drink from a lead cup. Never let a servant wearing a tungsten ring serve your food. Who'd drink from a lead cup anyway? Malfoy shrugged. We only use glass goblets for our guests at home, or copper if the occasion calls for it. Much more polite than silver or gold, which can hide a number of nasty things. Harry nodded, processing this information and sorting it into the newly formed categories in his mind. He recalled previous potions from class and committed their basest behaviors to memory. Now that he knew to look for it, the pattern was there all along. He swished his wand and cleaned up the vitriol, having no wish to accidentally spill any of that on himself or the table. So, restless again? Malfoy frowned. Yes. I feel like I've got to leave right now whenever I get to that stage. Would it help you if I were doing it with you? How could that possibly help? I don't know. Maybe having another person would anchor you. Malfoy stood. I don't need to be anchored, Potter. I think we're done for tonight. He'd collected his book and left before Harry could even formulate a response. Harry stared at the doorway and the dark, empty corridor beyond, completely baffled. What had he done to put Malfoy so off? Extraordinarily, Malfoy sat next to him at breakfast the following morning. Across from him, Hermione lowered her prophet and flicked her eyes between the two of them. Harry could see the gears turning, and he hated it because he didn't want to answer questions and he didn't know how to, even if he did. Fortunately, Millicent came in next and shoved in beside Hermione, quickly pulling her into what Harry was beginning to suspect was an arithmancy-based form of foreplay. Hermione was certainly responding to it. He turned to Malfoy, if only to look away from Hermione's flushed cheeks and how like Malfoy's they looked when he was leaning over a cauldron. Good morning. Malfoy was partially buttering his bread again. Hello. Did you practice any more last night? Malfoy scowled, shoved some toast in his mouth. Yes. Well, perhaps a different tactic then. I read an article in this week's issue of Potions Today that discussed the limited use of sal ammoniac as a base in recent times. It said it was because mass-manufactured cauldrons. Harry hesitated. You read it? No, said Malfoy. I've just made a lot of potions in my life. Factory-produced cauldrons have always reacted poorly with it. Something about the charms used on them. It brews fine in my stone cauldron at home. You are really good at potions, aren't you? Harry muttered. Stepped at his banger and felt genuinely bitter about life for a moment. Malfoy was ace at transfigurations and potions, and Harry was just playing along, trying to prove a point to his goddamn boggart. You can tell you don't really like potions that much, Malfoy added, and Harry hated him all the more for being able to read him so well. More than fuck, he was trying to like them. He was even reading the sudding publications. What more did they want from him? You'll never be any good unless you do, which is a shame since you've got intuition. You have to love something to do it properly. Which is how you're so great at animagus transformations. Immediately he regretted it, but it was too late. Malfoy's face had already transformed from open and genial to the closed-off facade he'd worn all through the war. It was a face Harry hadn't realized he never wanted to see again until he did, in fact, see it again.
An animagus transformation is merely one aspect of the school of transfigurations, Potter. At least I can turn a fish into a bird without asphyxiating it. I haven't seen you do that or brew successful potion in recent memory. I just did the suntan solution,
Harry said, indignant. And the cold cure had come out usable last night. People were starting to look, and he spelled up a muffliato with an angry flick of his wrist. Malfoy watched the movement, his eyes widening fractionally, but then the sneer returned.
Yes, that's why your skin has an orange tint today, trying to get a head start on your base tint for Mallorca. I am not.
Harry looked down at his arm, frowned.
Fine, I'm a bit orange. Ember, really.
Malfoy hummed in a decidedly disbelieving manner.
Perhaps it's a good thing you only took a bit of it.
Harry was still frowning down at the sort of peach tint to his arm. Bugger! He was going to have to drink lemon juice to counteract it. When he realized he'd thought of the antidote without really thinking about it, he was supremely pleased with himself. Then he remembered that he'd been pleased when he made the potion too.
I thought I'd done it perfectly.
Malfoy smirked.
Works well enough. It made your skin darker. It just makes you a bit salmon at the same time. Well, it looked like yours.
Malfoy shrugged.
It's an art. You can repaint it dullly by following a template, but it doesn't matter how perfectly you do it. It still won't be art unless you're an artist too. You have to take a formula and then transform it to make it meaningful. That's the point of potions.
Harry sighed. That made a lot of sense.
I'm sorry for what I said. I still want to work together. You know a lot, and you've already helped me, and I really need help. What if I did my animagus with you? I'm just a bit ahead. We could transform together, and I could give you better advice if I'm doing it at the same time.
Malfoy regarded him.
All right, fine, but not tonight. I'm going to Sluggies. Not gate-crashing this time. This time I was actually invited.
And when Malfoy smiled at him, it was the worst thing in the world. There was no way Harry would ever be able to move past this one time when, for a moment, he'd been the only thing on Malfoy's mind, and it had been a good thought. But then Malfoy stood to leave, breaking the moment and the muffling spell, leaving Harry stuck, half-transformed and wholly undone. Entire life was becoming an animagus transformation. Just wasn't sure which he wanted to be, human or animal, present or future, Harry or someone who liked Malfoy. He walked down to Starkhorn's with Hermione, who looked radiant but distracted in her scandalously low-cut green dress. Showed off her scar from Dolores' curse and made her look dangerous and fierce and bloody hot all at once. Ron would be so miffed he missed this. It was February, and Harry hadn't written to him since the first letter came back after the holidays to let him know that he'd made it safely. C'est la dying best mateyness. If things had been different, Harry thought, if Ron had never had first call on Hermione, could have fallen for her too, maybe. Things would have been simpler that way. But things hadn't been, and Ron had, and Harry noticed Malfoy instead. And now it seemed Hermione noticed someone else too. Which was probably for the best, since Ron would come closer to being Harry's soulmate than hers, being as he was largely attracted only to men and androgynous-looking women. Millicent had always had a tough, brooding sort of look. Tonight she had her heavy hair pulled off her face in thick wrapped braids, and her dress was black leather and scandalously tight. As Millicent's waist's always been small enough to wrap an arm around. Merlin, it was indecent how she curved. It looked mean and vaguely foreign, and then Harry realized the xenophobia that Dursley's bred into him was showing its arse, and he decided she looked striking instead. He was staring at them with a particular look that made Harry uncomfortable. "I have to talk to Millicent about our project with Professor Vector. I'll see you, Harry." Well, Harry hadn't counted on having to go stag for this thing, but it looked like he wouldn't get a say in the matter. Which was bollocks, really, because he was not, by nature, a very sociable person. He was more of a Dark Lord-killing person, a vocation that typically did not leave a great deal of room for being the life of a party. He sloped off to the refreshments table and hoped that some enterprising student had come by earlier to spike the punch. Upon pouring himself a glass, he found that not to be the case, but positioned himself in a corner to nurse it anyway. Networking was not his thing. It wasn't long before his peace was interrupted.
"Quaint, isn't it?"
said Malfoy.
Our dates, dating each other, it seems."
Harry wrinkled his nose.
"No idea what she sees in her."
Although that was a lie, since Millicent was firmly in that second category of people Harry found visually appealing. Maybe it wasn't so much that Harry liked certain types of men and women over others. Maybe it was just that he liked the look of someone who could fight with him and not lose all the time. Malfoy sneered.
"I could say the same."
Rolling his eyes, Harry finished off his punch. He moved to get another glass, but Malfoy stopped him with a hand on his forearm.
"Care for a real drink?"
He waved a silver flask at Harry. It gleamed in the candlelight and made Harry think of the mercurial silver of a decent cold cure potion. Harry hesitated for only half a second.
"Yeah, all right."
He flicked his hand out and summoned 2 glasses of pumpkin cranberry punch for them, and Malfoy's eyes followed the movement as if he'd never seen anything like it. But he and Harry had never been friends before, so of course he'd never seen Harry do something nice for him. Unless one counted saving his life. Harry really didn't. There was just something the old him did, like a hobby. Malfoy tipped his flask of fire whiskey over the glasses.
"Cheers."
"Cheers." Harry echoed and took a swig. It burned. It tasted like fury cranberry. It was amazing. They settled into an easy camaraderie there in the corner, ragging on the other 7th and 8th years in attendance, and for a while Harry liked it.
"Why, do you suppose?"
Malfoy said sometime later.
"They've become so attached. Every time I look for Mill, she's off with Granger."
Harry shrugged, feeling uncomfortable.
"Hermione's been dying for another girl to be friends with for so long. I think she latched on to the first one who shared an interest with her. No one in Gryffindor really gets her."
Malfoy hummed thoughtfully.
"Probably the same for Mill, then. I guess it's good, even if it means the 2 of us have to spend the evening entertaining one another. What a pathetic pair we are, dumped even by our platonic dates."
Harry sipped his spiked juice, keeping the glass high to cover his smile. He could think of worse ways to spend the evening, all things considered.
"Speak for herself. Hermione makes plenty of time for me. I reckon you're this bad with women." "Definitely true,"
Malfoy said. Said casually. Malfoy wasn't even looking at Harry.
"But Mill's great for talking Quidditch, and her fantasy team is the only one that ever gives mine any real difficulty."
He frowned.
"She's not doing it this season. No time, she says. Bollocks, if you ask me. There's always time for Quidditch, and who am I going to compete with now? Everyone else is rubbish."
His distress over the lack of his fantasy league buddy was frankly endearing. It made Harry feel warm.
"You're in a league. I'll go in."
Dangerous, Harry, he thought. He didn't care. Malfoy raised an eyebrow, but didn't shoot him down, which was why it was so easy for Harry to keep running his mouth and making a fool of himself.
"Ron and I always talked about entering a league, but the entry fee's a bit strong for him, and he didn't like to let me cover for him, so we never did."
Malfoy smirked, but refrained, thanked Merlin for making a comment on Ron's financial standings.
"All right, Potter. You can be my Mill, but I assure you the entry fee for our league is even stronger than anything run by the Daily Prophet. We're picking teams down at the 3 Broomstick tomorrow lunch. Galleons up front. Magpies versus Pride on the wireless to follow."
Harry grinned.
"Brill."
And was Malfoy looking pleased too? Harry thought so.
"Harry Draco, what an absolutely outstanding bit of luck,"
Slughorn said as he came up on them. He slapped them both heartily on the shoulder and then stepped back to do the same to the companion he'd brought along.
"To very fine potion student, I'd like to introduce you to Miguela. Harry, Draco, Miguela Calderao. Miguela is Ministra de Poseos, that's Minister of Patience, in Portugal. Relied on to brew the President's own patience, a very dear friend of mine. Harry here has elected to pursue patience mastery after Hogwarts, and I've tried to convince Draco of the merits of doing the same, but he is decided on transfigurations."
Here Slughorn paused to wink at Miguela.
"Perhaps you can convince him otherwise. Well, I'll leave you to it."
When he'd wandered off to string together another unsuspecting pair of victims, Harry and Draco were left to entertain Miguela. She had dark, heavy eyes and a watchful expression that reminded Harry uncomfortably of Bellatrix Lestrange. But when she spoke, her voice was so low and smooth, and undeniably unlike Bellatrix, that the feelings passed.
"Transfiguration is a very worthy field to pursue,"
she said to Malfoy.
"Very like potions. Perhaps that says something of you, that you excel in both."
Harry, who never thought anything of the like, stared at her incredulously. He remembered his manners, fortunately, before she noticed, and resumed a more neutral expression.
"How so?" he asked.
Miguela smiled.
"Very temperamental, both fields. Mythical, one might say." "Do you refer to Merlin's affinity with both?"
Malfoy asked.
"Or do you mean that both are imprecise arts?"
"Both, I think," she said. She eyed Harry again, and he swallowed despite himself, seeing the resemblance again.
"I have always felt that brewing potion is like inventing the world.
Single potion can be brewed 100 slightly different ways, by 100 different brewers, and come out exactly the same, exactly as effective, all 100 times.
There's something deeper in that kind of magic than what we see in charms, don't you find, Harry?"
He nodded, only now realizing how true it was. Charms was wonderful magic, could do any number of wonderful things, but it was stagnant, precise. Levitation charm wouldn't work if the first syllable of the incantation was stressed instead of the second syllable. It had been great magic when he was 11 and practically a muggle-born. Now it felt more like technology than magic, like a light switch. It was always work if you applied the power correctly.
"Yes, it's a higher magic."
She smiled at this, something Bellatrix would have never done in quite such a sane way.
"And the same for our transfigurations,"
she said, turning back to Malfoy again. Harry could see that too. Transfigurations didn't even usually use incantations. It was a much freer magic than others.
"I can see why the two of you are so drawn to these subjects. You have the look about you."
"What look?" asked Harry.
"You are restless," she said. "You desire change,
maybe chaos, for our lives to be more than living, finding some higher magic to life itself. You will not be disappointed in your chosen path. They are good for those of us who look for something higher than money in our vocations." They passed half an hour with Miguela, engaged them on matters of transmutation and the symbolic similarities therein with both their field. For a while, Malfoy kept her talking on a potion she was working on to change the blood type in donor blood to match the receiving patients.
"I love change," she said. "Creating change, stopping change, watching change. It's such a beautiful, chaotic thing."
On that, Harry had to agree. He watched Malfoy's repressed, excited mannerisms as they talked, and felt a deep longing build inside him. The two of them, they could change too, he thought. The ingredients were there. Perhaps the foundation was forming. He just didn't yet know the recipe. Miguela took out 2 cauldron-shaped cards and handed one to each of them.
"My Floo address,"
she said.
"I would be delighted to keep in touch with both of you as you move through your careers."
"Thank you," said Harry, and meant it. If for nothing else, meeting Miguela had made clear one thing. He could love potions, in his own way. He wasn't just doing this to keep himself from self-destructing. There was a magic in it that felt very like the magic in himself sometimes. Chaotic, restless, ever-changing. He thought he could see the same in Malfoy, and as he watched the other men get tangled up in another conversation, this time on transfigurations with a handsome Asian wizard, he thought they'd already changed. Surely, the free way Malfoy smiled now was an alchemy all of its own. It was certainly the reactive agent in that brewing in Harry's chest. Spent the entire night at Malfoy's side, sometimes listening to conversations Malfoy had with others, sometimes their roles reversed, sometimes, again, just the two of them pretending to be miffed that Hermione and Millicent were still ignoring them. It felt like adding the wrong ingredient to a potion and knowing the result would come out right anyway. 100 different recipes, he remembered, and still a perfect potion. To be continued. Thank you for listening to this chapter of Azoth by Zeitgeistic. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or AO3.